Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to walk you through the installation of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is one of the most widely used Linux distributions. It is Debian based and it is configured in a way that makes it as user-friendly as possible, meaning that it is pretty much ready to use straight after the installation without having to do almost anything. Now when you start the PC with an installation DVD already inserted into the optical drive, the installation should start automatically, and if it doesn't, you may have to change some BIOS settings, but for now let's just assume everything went as it should. If you have such a problem, let me know down in the comments below, and I will do my best to explain what you can do in such a situation, or I will try to make another video on that topic. As I said, when you insert an installation DVD and start the computer, this process should start automatically, or you will get a message reading press any key to boot from CD/DVD. When you press some random key, this window should pop up after a couple of minutes, and on this first stage of the installation we have to choose the system language, and we have two options, the first of which is try Ubuntu. This allows us to load a live version of the operating system in order to see what the actual operating system looks like, to get a general feel of the operating system and to see if we like it or not. And the second option allows us to proceed with the actual installation. And in this case, I will just proceed with the installation. You may notice that in my case everything is taking quite some time to load. This is due to the fact that I'm doing this on a virtual machine, and right now I'm basically running two operating systems at the same time, which is using up a lot of my computer's system resources. But if you are installing Ubuntu on your actual physical computer, the entire installation should take you no more than 30 minutes, or even less. Now we have to choose our keyboard layout. Down below we can test the layout in cases where your language has multiple layouts, but for now I'm going to proceed with English, since I always can add as many layouts as I want from the actual operating system after the installation is done. So let's move on with English. Now we have a couple of options. If we choose normal installation, we will have a lot of pre-installed software on Ubuntu, and it may save you some time after the actual installation, meaning that you will have a web browser, different utilities, an office package, some basic games, and multimedia players. Or you can choose a minimal installation if you want only a web browser and some basic utilities. Here you have to choose for yourself. I usually prefer the minimal installation, so I can choose what software I want to use after the actual installation. But even if you choose normal installation, you can always remove whatever you don't want to use and so on, and you can install whatever packages you intend to use. So let's just go ahead with minimal installation. And regarding the other options, you have an option which allows you to download updates while installing Ubuntu. This will save you quite some time after the installation, but in order for this to work, you will have to connect to the network right after you boot up the installation disk. So I advise you to check that option, and I advise you to check the other option, which allows you to install different third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware and also for additional multimedia formats such as codecs and so on. This can also save you some time after the actual installation, so we can move on. Now we've reached the next step of the installation. Here we have to choose where to install the Ubuntu, and we can also create a manually create our own partition layout. Since I'm installing Ubuntu on a blank hard drive, the first option is erase disk and install Ubuntu. This will automatically partition the hard drive. And if we weren't using a blank hard drive, but we were going to dual boot Ubuntu with an already existing operating system, if I remember correctly, we would have an option saying install Ubuntu alongside. But for now, I'm not going to go into that topic regarding dual booting. I will explain all of that in another video. I will show you how you can install Linux and Windows together, or two versions of Windows, or two different Linux distributions. So for now, I'm not going to talk about that. As I said, the first option allows us to erase the entire disk and automatically configure the partition layout. And if we choose the second option, we can create and resize partitions ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and select the second option, because I prefer to manually configure everything. And here we see our hard drive. If you're used to installing Windows, in Linux things are a little bit different. SDA means the first physical disk on the PC. If you have multiple hard drives, or even if you have external hard drives or USB flash drives plugged into the PC while you're installing Linux, the installer will probably recognize them as well. So you will see SDA, which would be your first hard drive, SDB would be your second hard drive, SDC will be your third one, and so on. And this includes external hard drives and USB flash drives. So now I'm going to select the first and only hard drive on the computer. We click on New Partition Table. We get the usual warning stating that all existing data and partitions will be removed, and so on. So I'm going to continue. And here we see the entire available free space with a total size of 21.6 gigabytes. Now we can do this in multiple different ways. We can install Linux only on a root partition. We can also set up a home partition. If you don't know what kind of partitions Linux uses, I will try to explain this in another video. So now I'm going to stick to the basics. Usually when I install Linux, I prefer to use only a root partition. This is the equivalent of the C drive in Windows, and this is the actual partition where the operating system resides. If you want to set up a home partition, this partition will be used to store your user files, meaning that your entire home folder, videos, pictures, downloads, documents, and so on, will be placed on that partition, which can be handy in some cases. For example, if you later want to reinstall Linux, or you want to change the distribution, you can only format the root partition, leaving the home partition unaffected, and you can later attach that same home partition with your user data on it on another Linux distribution. So let's say I want to install Ubuntu on a 15 gigabyte root partition. So I type in the size. I'm going to leave the type as primary. Location for the new partition, of course, from the beginning on the space of the space. We will use ext4 file system, and this is very important. On mount point, from that drop down menu we have to select slash. Slash in Linux is the symbol for root partition. Whichever partition is listed as slash, this is your system root partition. Okay. But if you are installing Ubuntu on a blank hard drive and you don't want to deal with all of that, in the previous step you can just select the automatic option. And we see that I have created a 15 gigabyte root partition formatted in ext4 file system and listed as SDA1. This is the first partition on the SDA hard drive. And with the rest of that free space, I'm going to make a home partition. I'm going to leave it on I'm going to leave all of the available free space for that drive. We can just leave it as logical, beginning of the space, and again we're going to use ext4 file system. But on mount point, from the drop down menu, we have to select /home in order for that partition to be attached as a attached and used by Linux as a home partition. We click OK. As I said in a later video, I'm going to explain in more detail the different types of partitions in Linux, the root, home, boot partition, swap partition, and so on. So for now, I'm just going to use that layout. And below we can see that we have an option for the bootloader. We can install the bootloader on different partitions if we use a separate boot partition. But for now I'm not going to get into that topic. I advise you to just leave it as it is by default. Meaning that you should probably just install the bootloader on SDA if you don't plan on dual booting or if you don't have anything else in mind. So I'm leaving it on SDA, and we can proceed with the actual installation. Here we can see a list of all of the changes that will be made on the hard drive. And we can continue. Now we have to set our time zone. This will be set up automatically if you are connected on a network. So we move on. And now we have to type our name, a name for our PC, and a name for our user. And we also have an option whether we want to log in automatically without having to type our password every single time, or if Linux should require a password on every login. I'll just select login automatically. And we can move on. And now we just have to wait for all the files to be copied and for the installation to finish. As usual, during the installation, your computer may have to restart a couple of times. This is normal. And as you can see, the installation process is pretty straightforward and simple. This is what the installation for most modern Linux distributions looks like. But I'm going to do my best to make a video on most of the more popular and widely used distributions, so that every one of you can see the actual Linux distribution you want to install. So I'm going to do my best to make a video on Ubuntu, Debian, Lubuntu, Xubuntu, Kubuntu, Mint, Pop! OS, and so on. But keep in mind that the installation is almost identical. And as I said, now we just have to wait. And now the installation is almost finished and we have to restart the computer. So I'm going to go ahead and restart. As I said, in my case everything is taking quite a while due to the fact that I'm using a virtual machine. By the way, if you found the video helpful, I will appreciate it if you hit thumbs up and subscribe. And also, if you have any questions or if I wasn't very clear in any of the steps, feel free to let me know down in the comments below and I will do my best to explain everything I might have missed. And also, excuse my English if I've made some mistakes. English, as you can probably tell, isn't my first language, so excuse me for any mistakes I might have made. Now we have to remove the installation medium, meaning that if we are installing Ubuntu from a DVD or a USB, we have to remove the DVD or USB and then hit enter. We're almost done with the installation. Now we have to configure some final steps. I'm not going to connect any online accounts to Ubuntu, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that step. Now we have an optional step to set up live patch. I've never used live patch, but from what I see here, this is some silent update system from Canonical to install updates on Ubuntu without having to restart the PC. For now I'm just going to go ahead and skip that, but if you're interested in live patch, you can do some online research and decide for yourselves if you want to set it up. And here we have to decide if we want to send information to Canonical, which would help improve Ubuntu. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and click no. The last thing we need is another thing collecting data besides Windows 10. I'm not going to go into that topic, but I'm definitely going to select no. And in the next step we have the option to allow some applications to access our location. Of course I'm going to leave this turned off, but again you can choose for yourselves. And we're ready to go. This is the Gnome Desktop, or you can also encounter the pronunciation as Gnome. It's the same thing. This is the desktop environment that Ubuntu uses by default. There are other variations of Ubuntu using different desktop environments, but the standard Ubuntu desktop is the Gnome Desktop. It's kind of a more modern looking desktop environment. If you don't know what a desktop environment is, I will try to make another video on that topic, but basically the desktop environment is the look and feel of the operating system. The Gnome Desktop is pretty clean, it looks very modern, it's very similar to I would describe it as a desktop version of Android. Now I'm not going to show you the whole desktop environment since I'm using a virtual machine, as I said, and everything will take quite some time to load. But generally you have a very clean desktop, very modern interface, everything is very intuitive. It will take some getting used to if you have been using mainly Windows, but it's pretty straightforward. One thing you should keep in mind is that the Gnome Desktop is quite heavy regarding the system resources, so if you have an older PC or generally speaking a weaker computer, you may want to consider some Linux distributions with using a more lightweight desktop environment such as XFCE or LXQT or LXDE. But I'm going to talk on that topic in another video. As I said, the installation is finished and now you're ready to use your operating system. I hope that you found the video helpful. That will be all from me for today, and I'll see you in the next video.